Hi there. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Crystal Wittevrongle, collaborating with Common Sense Edmonton, here with Maya Brady, who is running for Edmonton City Council in the Anirniq ward. Maya, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today.
Thank you for having me.
I would love to hear more about you. What foundation are you bringing into City Council?
Absolutely. So just to start, because at the door, sometimes I get this. I am 36, not 26, not 19. A lot of times people are like, aren't you a little young to do this? But no, I take care of myself just like I plan on taking care of the city. But essentially, I have a background in development and in policy. I spent 10 years working both internationally and in all levels of government in Canada, looking at policy, service delivery, and essentially policy on paper and policy in practice and the disconnect between the two, which we can see with current Edmonton City Council happens quite a bit. However, about 6 years ago, I did a complete 180. I followed my entrepreneurial calling and am a small business owner. I'm a multi-small business owner. I have 2 locations in the city. I didn't want a 9 to 5, so I work 24/7, and I'm happy doing it. But my businesses allow me to connect with the community. I've built them from the ground up. I've experienced the challenges that other small business owners have in the city. And I think the blend of academia, of government work experience combined with entrepreneurship provides a good blend. I'm also, a fresh face, a fresh voice, someone who I feel like can bridge the gap between kind of the younger generation and the older, and just be a real middle ground and speak for both sides and kind of challenge that status quo. Currently, I am also the only young female candidate of color running in Northwest Edmonton. So I think that I can provide perspectives from a range of different communities and groups.
Wonderful. And when you're door knocking or in your community, in any of the communities in your ward, what are some of the priorities for your ward in this election?
Absolutely. So Northwest Edmonton, it is really diverse just based on geography. Further, south of the Yellowhead or near the Yellowhead area, the predominant issues are around infill and some safety issues. When you get to the middle area of the ward, like Kensington, Carnarvon, that area, it is infill is creeping up there, but then you have issues of neighborhood revitalization and again, safety, some speeding. And then north of the ward where I'm actually located, we're a newer community. We don't have issues with infrastructure. So it's mostly maintenance and speeding are big issues. And of course, you're not seeing infill development. However, we have different experiences with blanket policies, such as some businesses, home-based businesses coming into the area, commercial level daycares operating in completely residential spaces. So the challenges vary, but based on the geography. But I would say the overarching issues in the community, infill, and people just not being heard. And of course, taxation. So I think that's just across the board, but people are paying more and receiving less. So that's just common everywhere.
Absolutely. And that's definitely something that I'm hearing also is, property taxes and spending and some of these bigger city decisions that residents just aren't feeling connected to.
Yeah.
And some of the things that the city is doing that the residents are, perhaps concerned about with regards to whether the city should be doing it at all. And so from your perspective, what is the role of municipal government and of city council?
So the core function of municipal government should be focused on the core services. So things like garbage removal, maintenance, infrastructure, safety, and then we can build up from there. But if the city isn't even doing the bare basics, which is the foundation of the city, that's where we have the challenges. And I feel like that's where people are becoming upset.
Hmm. Hmm. Absolutely. And the property tax debate fuels right into that, whether, people are seeing less return for the ever increasing property taxes.
Yeah.
So if you're elected to city council, what is your perspective on what should be done about taxes?
Absolutely. I don't think there's a single magic, silver bullet to tackling our increasing taxes. However, my first approach would be a zero-based budgeting position. It's not uncommon in other levels of government or in other cities to use. And that would essentially force every department to start at zero and then justify their budget needs, their allocations, their past performance, as well as, kind of prevent or limit any sort of complacency that's been built that way. It's the zero starting base for everyone, because as we know right now, every department is getting their previous year's budget plus a little bit more. And if they're not spending it, it's going to be moved to somewhere else. So it's almost like we might as well do something with it while we can. And I think a lot of people have this view of the city essentially making for work projects that kind of fall out of this basic core jurisdiction that they have. And I think that's what's upsetting people. We understand that we have to spend money on maintenance, snow removal, and garbage. However, it's these like plus extras that are being spent that people are upset about, especially when they don't see the value in what it's being spent, or more importantly, they didn't demand these services or they didn't demand these projects. And when they are demanding other things that are completely being ignored. I just want to throw in an example. Received an email the other day from our residents in Dunluce who are facing neighborhood revitalization issues. Anyways, there are some street lights in a green pathway and they're burnt out or they're not working. And they've gone to the city, they've gone to council being, we need these fixed. This is a safety issue. And they were flat out responded by, it's not a priority. So this is a basic service that has to do with safety, and it is the city infrastructure. Like these lights belong to the city, so that's being asked for. Meanwhile, the city is from the top down putting in projects in their community that they are against. So
what are some of the priorities the city is spending on that you don't think they should be spending on, or where would you redirect some of that funding from?
Absolutely. We need to look at things like neighborhood revitalization and bike lanes. And I'm not in a position to say I'm against these ideas. It's how it's being implemented that I feel people are not happy about. So they're being told that, hey, we're going to do this in your community. And it should be, when it comes to neighborhood revitalization, it should be like for like, if that's what the community is wanting. And when it comes to bike lanes, I support safe infrastructure. I support infrastructure that complements existing, roadways and sidewalks. However, they should not be competing or conflicting with each other. And when people see this happening in their communities and it fundamentally disrupts the flow, or parking or disability access, that's problematic. We are a democracy. We have wards for a reason, rather than, the councillors should be focused on what's happening in the ward. And I think that we've lost sight of that. I think we're making decisions as a city in general. So perhaps it's like a utopian view of what Edmonton would be like, and we're forgetting the context specific of everything, whether it's infill, bike lanes, housing, supportive housing, all of that. We're forgetting the context. They're blanket policies that are being put in without any regard to community voice or what actually works in that community.
And so I'd love to talk about the infill development issue, because I know that's been a big one where residents are not being heard, or at least they don't perceive that they're being heard, or that their concerns just are shrugged off by current city council. If you're elected, what do you plan to do differently about how residents are engaged in things like that?
Absolutely. So I support affordable housing, I support growth, and I support density. However, I feel that the blanket approach that we have taken as a city is not appropriate. And going back to the context, it's not context specific or context appropriate. So I would support motions to add height restrictions, aesthetic requirements, because there's not too many right now, implementing massing as opposed to only doing the lot size, and having doors face forward. I think that's been done in the recent changes. There are little steps and little policies that can be done, and a parking minimum It definitely is important. That's what you hear at the doors, and it is achievable. Good developers will add parking to a lot of these infill spaces. So if we can make, some sort of 0.5 parking requirement, I think it's achievable and it won't hinder that growth. I don't believe that the infill discussion should be a black and white. We have infill or we don't. I don't think that's appropriate. Edmonton needs to grow. However, we can narrow down and push builders to build better. And also, when we talk about development, there's places in the city that are completely suitable for this increased densification. We should be focusing attention on Blatchford lands, the Coliseum North lands, South Campus. These areas already have access to transportation. They have shopping malls nearby. They have the infrastructure that would support it. And it's basically a sitting empty duck that would be great revenue for the city to add to their tax base. Right now, they're just tax debts, right? So it doesn't have to be a black and white approach, but we need to do better. Maybe even in certain areas, we used to have a mature neighborhood overlay. I don't think it was done very well. However, we can reconsider looking at something like that for key mature neighborhoods in the city. Like my area, my house is 6 years old. I don't need anything like that. However, there's areas in the ward that definitely can benefit from that level of, whether it's security or protection. At the end of the day, when it comes to infill, it's free market, However, there are policies that can help narrow down the focus more, still providing housing options and still protecting the quality of the neighborhood or the context or the character of these neighborhoods.
And so how do you feel about the pace of development in some of these mature neighborhoods then under this, infill development policy?
I think that especially with the changes with the CMHC, we've definitely seen a big uptick in the rate. And then in the past 4 years, where the bylaws or with the policies don't really align, it's kind of allowed a proliferation of it, right? I think it's more of that shock value that people are kind of grappling with. And, going back to your question about what residents can actually do or what they can't do, there's very little recourse. You can appeal something, but the chances of a development being appealed just on the grounds of, oh, it doesn't fit into our neighborhood, doesn't really stand, right? There's very, I've spoken with Build Edmonton, Idea Edmonton, who represent builders as well as the infill. I've chatted with residents. So I've tried to provide myself with a very comprehensive view. I don't think it's fair to provide knee-jerk reactions to policies. I think maybe at the doors, people love hearing that, like, I'm going to cancel all infill. I just don't think that's sensible. And for myself, that's not the way I choose to lead. I want to understand both sides because we have blanket policies. And so if we are cutting it down, we're not going to have any growth anywhere. So it's just we need to look at these policies, narrow it down, perhaps include some way that residents can actually have some sort of feedback. I think that if residents felt heard, or if there was some sort of way that they could have recourse, they'd feel a little bit better about it.
And you'd mentioned some areas that have transit or, transit-oriented kind of development spaces. And so that leads me to thinking about transit just in general. And, we've seen massive declines in ridership in transit because of safety, really. What do you think about the way that the city's managing safety on transit? And what would you do differently if you were in city council?
So safety on transit specifically, to answer that question, one of the first things that I would support is adding some sort of fare gate or a turnstile. I know that it's been approached with the city before, but I'm pretty sure that it was shut down. One, because of cost. Yes, it's a high cost. But secondly, that it would be putting up barriers to vulnerable populations, which I can understand. However, I don't know why Edmonton feels like we are the only city that somehow doesn't need them. There's other municipalities, other places in the world that see value. And I'm sure, I haven't looked at the data, but I'm pretty sure that there is some sort of evidence-based, approach to what turnstiles can provide or can't provide. It's definitely not a silver bullet solution, but it's definitely that first barrier to prevent people who shouldn't be getting on trains or who are up to no good and just there to loiter from actually getting into that space. So public transportation is unviable if people don't feel safe. I was a university student, about 10 years ago before that, and I felt perfectly safe on the train. I had no issues whatsoever. I felt like there was a presence. I felt like it was full of people. But the less people we have on the trains, the less eyes on the street, the less people in uniform, then that just is an invitation for social disorder. And how can we push for people to take public transportation if they don't feel safe? For a little while there, we had, I don't know, this is probably not the appropriate term, but, like cops for hire, security for hire, that was ineffective, and then we've moved to the peace officers, the transit peace officers, but transit peace officers have a very, very limited mandate. They're good for having eyes on the street. They can fine or ticket people, but they can't do anything beyond that. They're essentially there to observe and report. And that creates a really big lag. I think that having actual EPS presence in stations or on trains definitely will have a benefit. It doesn't mean that there has to be, a policeman on the train at every single time. But again, something rotating. And a friend of mine works with the EPS, and there actually has been a pilot program that has been done where when the train goes to the end of the line, if there's still people in there, they go, they chat with them, they understand. Because if you're at the end of the line and you're not getting off, what are you doing, right? Do you need support? Like basically, what are you doing? So just putting those eyes on the street. And that just leads me, I don't know if you're going this direction, just to the bigger question of security and safety in general. And that we have definitely lost police presence, visibility in the city. So with the changes in budgets, then since the pandemic, we've removed uniforms from the front line. So I've had meetings with the EPS, we've chatted with the police chief, and essentially the city has outpaced its sorry, got distracted there. The city has outpaced its police force. And it's not a matter of adding 1,500 new bodies on the street. We need to change their mandates and their responsibilities. We've removed police from the forefront. So we need them back there. And then safety is not just about arresting people and putting them to the jail. It's also about wraparound services. Those are equally important. So you need preventative services to help prevent people getting in those situations. Then you need just support in general for people in it. You need deterrence, and then you need enforcement. So those are kind of like the 4 pillars of safety. The police need to work together with social service agencies and so forth, which they have been doing, but those relationships need to be supported by whatever decisions that city council makes.
And how do you see the relationship with the province feeding into that? Because a lot of the, mental health addictions, health supports is a provincial jurisdiction, and the city and the province have had, their relationship has been at odds a number of times in the past few years. So how do you see that playing out, or what would you do to kind of fortify that relationship?
Absolutely. So good thing I'm a team player, so play well with others, but definitely that relationship needs to improve. So with current council, with new council and a new mayor, definitely need to sit down at a round table and have these open and honest discussions about expectations and responsibility and jurisdiction. We have a bad relationship, so we need to mend that, but we also as a city don't want to be walked all over and for them to be meddling in municipal areas. But we need to strengthen that bond and be clear about expectations, because what the city has done, because we haven't gotten adequate health and mental health services, we've decided to play those roles by ourselves. And unfortunately, we don't have the funding and we don't necessarily have the capacity to do that completely on our own. And so when people get upset about, oh, we're paying all these tax dollars, where are they going? Well, a lot of it is to kind of subsidize outside responsibility.
Mm-hmm. And so when we're thinking about the police more broadly, in order to kind of have them be more visible or be more on the ground, do you see needing to increase resources or simply, redistribute the resources that are currently already provided to EPS?
I think there needs to be just a slight increase. We were shown, I guess they allocate one officer is technically supposed to cover or be responsible for like 175 people. There's some sort of ratio that way. So there is a slight decrease in how many bodies we need. But I think the bigger thing we need to do is changing up our responsibilities and where they play their roles. So I have one of my businesses just on the periphery of downtown. The business association used to have a police officer, that like a liaison officer that the local businesses can go to, and that role was completely removed. There used to be beat cops patrolling the area. Like my business on 107th, heading into Chinatown, it's a pretty vulnerable area. Loss of active beat officers. I've had to call officers, for a couple different reasons, and just their response time. But even if they respond, it's like, well, what do you want us to do? I'm like, I don't know. Like, what can you do? I guess is the better question. What can you do for me? And I think a lot of business owners are feeling disappointed. Business owners and homeowners or residents, are feeling that way, and it's created a loss of trust. Nowadays you hear like, well, why bother calling the police? Because what can they even do anyways? If your car gets broken into, you're not even going to bother because you can't do anything about it, right? Or you feel that they can't do anything about it. I definitely think there needs to be a throwback to community policing. That was, building those relationships with the police and community groups, with faith-based organizations, with different social agencies, with different partners, I think really strengthens it, especially from a preventative aspect. And again, these people, it's the eyes on the street. These people know best what's in their community, and they also know best how to approach it, right? I don't think we're going to see a return of community police stations, like the physical stations, anymore. That was a question that I had asked them. I don't think we're going to do that, but we need other ways to report, because nowadays, if you have an issue, you're not going to go to a police station. In Northwest Edmonton, like, I can walk there, is the North headquarters, and you can't go there. As a resident, they've blocked it off. There's no public facing service there. So if I actually had to go speak to someone directly, I have to go downtown, or I have to go all the way to Clairview. And it's just strange and ironic for this community to have a giant police station there, but not feel additional safety. So.
And so how does city council factor into helping rebuild trust between like the EPS and residents? Because it seems like there's a big a gap there.
Yeah, I think, part of that responsibility is with the EPS as its own entity. But one thing that, in terms of building trust, that I feel, was problematic is that a huge chunk of the city budget goes towards EPS. And there are questions of accountability and transparency with that. And, I think that they are, during the discussion of the EPS, they said that they are definitely open to becoming more transparent and open about where that money actually goes. Because correct me if I'm wrong, but as it stands, city council doesn't have the ability to look at EPS budget line by line. I think we have 2 councillors that sit with, or in some form with the police council, so they're a little bit more in tuned. But just the general public, we can't see where all the spending is. So I think more transparency that way for as just a resident, why am I paying more for police when I can't even see police? So what am I paying for, right? So just going back to that and showing where everything comes from.
Mhm. And this is an interesting time for an election. It's the first time that, we're seeing municipal political parties. And so what are you thinking about that? Are you part of any of these parties? And how does that play into how you approach city council?
Absolutely. So I am running with Better Edmonton. We are a party, but we operate as a team. So I think there's been a lot of misconceptions, a lot of things on social media that essentially has been bashing the party system. It's not something
Mhm.
brand new and uncommon. Edmonton actually had political parties in the 70s. In BC, there are political parties. I think that when we hear the name party, we automatically associate it with party politics, with left, right, NDP, conservative, liberal. However,
Mhm.
I'm speaking for Better Edmonton myself. I can't speak for, the other party that's running in this election, but Better Edmonton operates as a completely nonpartisan entity. We're not directed either way. We actually have a huge mix. We have a candidate who was with NDP caucus for years, and everyone has their own different political views. But when it comes to municipal level and the decisions you make, in my opinion, and what I say at the door is garbage removal and left or right wing issue? Is your pothole a left or right wing issue? What are the different approaches to this? So for myself, I'm very central in my views, and at the end of the day, my decisions are based on what the community wants rather than any outside political affiliations that way. And, for Better Edmonton itself, we have Tim Cartmel, who is our front runner for mayor. As soon as the day after the election, the party disintegrates. So there is no party whip. Tim Cartmel is not my boss. I write all my own policy. I do all my own work this way. But what binds us together, and the reason that I decided to run with Better Edmonton, is that we can work together and we're a team. Because right now, current city council is very fragmented. They don't get along. There's little cliques and groups. So it's based on the foundation that, hey, if you have 13 people that can get along together, that share the common values and beliefs, if 2, 3 of us, 4 of us are successful in this, we can actually get to City Hall and we can make decisions fast and efficiently. It doesn't mean that we all have to agree. At the day after the election, whoever is successful is basing their decisions based on their communities. There is not some entity outside being like, you're voting this way or that way. Right.
Mhm.
So yeah, I just want to clear that up. Whenever I'm able to go to the doors and have that discussion, it's not been a problem whatsoever.
Mhm.
And for myself personally, why I chose to do it is being, someone who is fairly young, new to running at this level. The team structure provided me that good foundation of what I'm getting myself into. We have a political analyst, we have people in the IT area, we have social media people. So that's provided me a good understanding of, okay, this is how to do it. This is how things are run. And
Mhm.
should I run again, in 4 years, if I'm not successful this time, I definitely feel equipped to, have that foundation. So I'm
Mhm.
happy for what it's provided me at this level.
Mhm. And at the provincial or the federal level, like understanding where a candidate sits in the
Mhm.
like political lens helps voters really like understand your values. So
Yeah,
would you say
that's
you're
fair.
more on the left or the right, or you're more middle of the road?
I'm in the middle. Yeah, I've been in the middle for as long as I can remember, or as soon as I started voting. So I have very kind of central views that way.
Mhm, mhm. Well, that's wonderful. And Maya, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. If there's one thing you can leave with our viewers, whether or not they're in your ward, what would you like to leave behind today?
Definitely. It's time for Edmonton to have a fresh face and fresh perspective. And it's not just about fixing what's broken, it's also about building for the future. I think that's one thing we haven't touched on here. We can talk about all the terrible things going wrong, how it was better in the good old days, but Edmonton has so much potential and we can grow so much. And whether it's small businesses, bringing in industry, bringing in events into the city, we have the capacity to grow. We just need to allocate our spending better. We need to completely reprioritize, get the basics done right. I guess if there's a campaign slogan I can go, it's my approach is back to basics. It's let's build that foundation, then we can add the sprinkles and icing on top. Flip over that bucket, reprioritize every single thing, and start from scratch.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah,
well, that's wonderful.
Hoping that the city agrees. And Northwest Edmonton in particular, we have some of the lowest levels of investment out of any ward in the city. And what I'm looking to do is really bring that energy back to the table and call for the services, call for the attention that Northwest Edmonton deserves. We've always been on the back burner. I've been very privileged to be in, rooms that I wouldn't have found myself in prior to the election. And, in all those rooms, still North Side, oh, where's that? Right? There's just not a lot of action or movement going on, which is unfortunate because it's not actually true. We're a very vibrant community. We have very strong, cultural groups, lots of small businesses, very, very active in the small business realm. And we need to just, get in the front there, a little butt our way in the front of the line a little bit. So that's my approach. Yeah. Nothing crazy, nothing dramatic or radical. It's just, let's get back to basics. We've gotten too fluffy and we've gotten really ahead of ourselves. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's wonderful. And thank you again so much for spending the time to chat with me today. It's been very insightful to learn your perspectives for your ward and for the city of Edmonton. And to our viewers, thank you also for being here today. Please get engaged. If you are engaged, stay informed. Let's bring out a higher voter turnout than 2021. Voting is so important. Your voice can and should be heard. So please get out there. And thank you again, Maya.
Thank you.